So maybe you've deconstructed your faith. You started asking hard questions, pulling apart what you were taught, and now you're left wondering, what comes next? Do you walk away from Christianity? Do you try to rebuild? And if you do, how? The truth is, deconstruction isn't supposed to be the end of your faith. It's meant to be the beginning of something deeper, stronger, and more real. And so here's a simple framework to rebuild your faith in a way that actually makes sense. Now sure, it might feel like freedom at first, like shaking off something that was weighing you down. But over time, you realize that tearing something down, it's not the same as building something true. If you strip away belief without replacing it with something solid, you're going to be left with a void. And that void doesn't stay empty for long. Something will eventually fill it. Cynicism, confusion, a worldview shaped by whatever feels right in the moment. And listen, I get it. Deconstruction, it is necessary. You might have grown up in a church that was rigid and legalistic, where rules mattered more than grace. Or maybe you experienced Christianity in a way that it was shaped by people who misused Scripture to control or manipulate or even harm. And maybe you were given answers that just didn't actually answer anything. It was just cliches that left you feeling more lost. And if that's your story, I hear you. Questioning those things doesn't mean you're walking away from God. It actually means you're getting closer to Him. Because if your old faith was built on something shaky, you don't need to abandon faith. You just need to find a better foundation. So how do you do that? How do you rebuild your faith in a way that actually makes sense? A faith that's not just inherited but owned. A faith that's not blind but built on truth. Let's talk about it. If you've deconstructed, you might feel like your faith has been just torn apart. But here's the good news, you don't have to stay that way. Faith can be rebuilt, and it can be stronger, deeper, and more rooted in truth than ever before. So where do you start? Here are the 5 key steps to reconstructing your faith. Step 1, start with Jesus, not just the church. One of the biggest mistakes people make is thinking that faith starts with the church instead of with Jesus. Yeah, the church has problems. Yes, Christians have made mistakes, some of them deeply painful. And yes, church history is messy and at times atrocious. But Christianity isn't built on people, it's built on a person. And when Jesus asked his disciples if they wanted to leave like so many others, Peter's response wasn't, where else will we find a better church? It was, at the end of the day, Christianity rises and falls on who Jesus is. So if you're questioning everything, why not start with him? Who was Jesus? What did he actually teach? Why did his followers believe so deeply that they were willing to die for him? Because if Jesus is who he says he is, that changes everything. Second, test what you believe. Don't just react to what you don't. Deconstruction often starts because something in your faith didn't hold up. Maybe you were taught harmful ideas. Maybe you saw hypocrisy in the church. Maybe you realized that some of what you believed wasn't actually biblical. And it's easy to reject beliefs that are harmful or wrong. But here's the key question. What are you replacing them with? If you reject a version of Christianity that was too legalistic, does that mean no Christian morality is true? If you realize your church had bad theology, does that mean all theology is bad? If you stop believing in something, do you have a better alternative or are you just reacting? Because there's a big difference between testing your faith and just reacting against it. Testing faith means asking hard questions, weighing evidence, and seeking truth. Reacting just means throwing everything out because something hurt you. And here's the danger. If you don't test your doubts as seriously as you test your beliefs, you're not actually seeking truth, you're just walking away from one assumption into another. So if you're in the process, slow down. Ask yourself, am I rejecting truth or am I just rejecting pain? Am I looking for something better or am I just looking to tear something down? Faith should be tested, but make sure you're testing it against truth, not just personal frustration. Because walking away from faith without replacing it with something solid doesn't lead to freedom. It just leaves you unanchored. 3, seek out the best Christian thinkers, not just the loudest ones. Here's a question. When you started questioning your faith, who did you listen to? Because in the age of the internet, the loudest voices are often the most reactionary. The ones saying, Christianity is fake, the Bible's outdated, Jesus never existed. And these voices get amplified not because they're the most thoughtful, but because they're making the most noise. But have you actually explored the best arguments for Christianity? Have you wrestled with apologetics? Have you looked at the intellectual case for Christianity from history, philosophy, and science? Have you engaged with Christian scholars, reading people like C.S. Lewis, William Lane Craig, N.T. Wright, Tim Keller, scholars who have spent their lives studying faith at the deepest level? And have you studied the strongest ideas of Christianity or just reacted to the worst parts of it? Because here's the reality. It's easy to tear down a shallow version of faith. Honestly, my 6-year-old daughter can do that. It's easy to reject a misrepresentation of Christianity, but have you truly engaged with the depth and richness of what Christianity actually is? Because if Christianity is true, it's going to hold up, but you have to be willing to give it a fair shot. Doubt, that's normal. Questions, necessary. But don't just listen to the voices telling you to walk away. Listen to the voices that challenge you to think deeply and find the truth for yourself. 4, reconnect with a faith community that encourages growth. Faith was never meant to be just an intellectual exercise. It's something we live out in community. And listen, I get it. If you've been burned by church, the last thing you want is to go back. But finding a healthy, biblically grounded community, it is one of the best ways to actually live out a reconstructed faith. Because faith, it's not just something we think about, it's something that we were meant to practice alongside others. 5, allow room for mystery. One of the hardest lessons in reconstructing faith is realizing you don't have all the answers. There will always be mystery. There's always going to be things you don't fully understand, and that's okay, because the alternative gives even less solutions. Life's messy, it's complicated. It's full of wonder and pain, joy and sorrow. It's the price of admission for breathing. But faith isn't about having a perfect airtight belief system, because that doesn't exist. It's about trusting a person. And that person, if Jesus really is who he says he is, then he's worthy of our trust, even in the question. So here's what I want you to know. Your faith isn't over. Yes, you've questioned things. Maybe you've even felt like everything you once believed is just unraveling. And that can be unsettling, painful even. But questioning isn't the same as losing faith. In fact, it can be the beginning of something deeper. And some of what you once believed might have been wrong. Maybe it was built on traditions rather than truth. Maybe it was shaped more by fear than by God's love. But that doesn't mean you have to walk away from all of it. Because real faith, the kind that lasts, isn't about never questioning. It's about seeking truth and holding on to what's real. It's about testing, refining, and rebuilding, not just tearing down. So if you're in the process, don't stop at deconstruction. Don't let the pain, doubts, frustrations be the end of the story. Keep going, keep asking hard questions, not to tear down, but to discover what is truly solid. Keep seeking, not just answers, but for the God who invites your questions. And keep rebuilding. Because what's on the other side of this journey, it's not the absence of faith. It's a faith that is stronger, deeper, and more unshakable than ever before.